All right, Dad Bod Rap Pod. We are back with another dope interview for you, the listening audience. Today, joining us in Zoom is a musician with a really incredible, eclectic new project out that everybody should check out. We want to welcome Steling Toles to the program. How's it going, man?
Well, I'm chilling, man. I'm good. Good to hear you, man.
Yeah. So, are you hitting us up from Detroit right now?
Yep, right on the east side, man.
That's so dope. We were talking about when you first jumped on that your space looks very Detroit. Like this is how we imagine Detroit to be.
That's when they built
some San Jose kids
to last.
That's dope. So Manager on McNichols. Let's get into it. Manger on McNichols. Oh, that makes a lot more sense. Manger on McNichols. My apologies. New project that you have out, collaboration with Boldy James.
Right.
Tell us how that came into being, because it's a new project, but you guys have been working together for a while, right?
Yeah, that's my little bro, man. Like we've been brothers since 2000, man. And so in the year 2000, he came to my crib through a friend of mine. So I was starting a recording studio and just got an 1880, which at the time was like all the rage, because the 1880 was the digital recorder everybody was on. This is just before DAWs and stuff. So our first order of business was to do a compilation, basically. And we had an artist on there to come for the compilation to record. And he brought his little brother and this other guy with him. And the other guy with his little brother was Boldy. And Boldy wasn't even there to record. He was just there to watch his friend's brother record the song. But as the legend goes, there was a very attractive woman there with the guy recording, and he wasn't too focused on the song, and it was taking forever to get done. And Boldy was in the corner saying lyrics under his breath. And the producer of the song, he turned to him, he was like, "Hey, let me hear that." And he started saying it. He's like, "Can you do this over your beat?" And he's like, "Yeah." So Boldy got up to the mic. Boldy did the entire song in one take.
Whoa.
And it was like 5 minutes too. Yeah, me and him talked about we probably gonna release that song one day. He was 17 years old.
Dope.
And it still holds up to this day. But one take, that was it. And afterwards, he was like, "Man, can I still come through and record?" I'm like, "Anytime." So the funny thing was he would always come through. A lot of his friends wouldn't, because I wouldn't let people smoke and drink in the house. So it was like only people that were really serious came and stayed. And he was one of those people. So for about 7 years, he would just come over. He would like bring beats from other people, or he would like bring instrumentals from something else and record songs, and I would let him. And I was working on another project at the time, so he had yet to rap over my music. He didn't rap over my music until 2007. So what you hear is just the period before his career began, from 2007 to 2010. And so one of the last songs we recorded, which is the last song on the record, Got Flit, was eventually what will become Getting Flit, which was on the Cool Kids mixtape that started his career. So he kind of went from working with me to working with Chuck, and then he was off to the races. And so from 2010 on, I was just kind of chilling and, disoriented, because I kept having these floods in my basement where I kept having to move records around and all this stuff. And how setup is important to production. Like, where everything is at and where you're going to pull everything from. And so because I was so disoriented, I wasn't making too much new music. But I kept meeting musicians for some reason, along with like a bunch of guys coming back to the city who were like world-class jazz musicians, young guys that were just getting reacclimated into the scene. And I'm like building with them. And next thing you know, everybody's recording on this stuff. So I spent years just tracking musicians. And it got to a point where it's like, damn, I gotta edit this and arrange this, put this all together, And so that's what a lot of the process was. So his vocals what he originally rapped to was like just skeletal boom bap, like chop sample, kick snare hat, you know. But as I recorded more people, I began to compose the music around his vocals. So it's more like the music was written to his vocals and his vocals written to the music.
Yeah, it's such an interesting project, and he has 3 records this year, so it sets up this interesting dynamic, right? It's like you have your Alchemist project, your Jay Versace project, and then kind of this artful take that you produced. And it's I think it's one of the most original sounding rap records to come out in recent memory. And I guess I just want to say, like, I love how densely layered it is. It's almost like, I'm a lyrics guy. I always listen to the lyrics first, and I love to pick apart different like allusions or references or things like that. On this record, the lyrics are relatively straightforward, but the music has so much depth. Like, there's just so many different things going on. So I guess there's a question coming. Don't worry.
No, I'm good. I'm listening.
So I guess the question I want to ask you is this: at certain times, was there way more to it, and you scaled it back to be more hip hop, or was it like fully orchestrated at a certain point, or like are we hearing the versions that are mainly what you had in mind from the beginning? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I didn't know where it was going.
Okay.
Because here's a weird thing. Like the machine that I was using, the 1880 that I tracked everything into, it's set up so where you can record up to 6 tracks. And after you record 6 tracks, you have to begin bouncing multiple tracks on the one track. So say if I have like the bass on one track, I have the flute on another track, I have to basically consolidate those down to one track to open up 2 more tracks to record something else. So it allows you to track up to 16 different things on one track, but you can't listen to all those things that you recorded at the same time. So I didn't even know what all these instruments sounded like together until like the last year or 2 of recording it. So a lot of it for me was kind of in the dark because I could only work on it in pieces, you know. So I didn't know what it was going to sound like ultimately. So in a lot of ways, it just kept expanding. A lot of the stuff I didn't intend for it to be as elaborate as it came out. But one thing that I wanted to do, kind of to your point, was create. I feel like in a lot of hip hop, the music acts as the backdrop for the rapper, right? And I really wanted to dismiss that relationship to where I'm really close to him. Like, that's my little brother. So my intention was to create a sound around him that became the living, breathing, functioning environment that he was immersed in. That's why the vocals aren't mixed in front of everything. It's basically like you're listening to him inside of the contraption that is his reality, as if you're watching a fish within the water that it's immersed in. So, like, I wanted to show, like, he's straightforward, like you said, but he's in very complicated, very dense, very layered, very fragile, very ever-changing circumstances that moment to moment, you don't know what the hell is happening. And it gets hectic and it gets overwhelming and a lot is happening, but like that is the reality. And so I wanted to kind of like create a picture around him that embodied that. You know, like one thing I kept in mind a lot of times recording this was like, I wanted this to be like a Detroit version of City of God, the film, you know.
Dope.
And also like just very influenced by like Radiohead, Kid A, and OK Computer, and Stereolab's Dots and Loops, and Pharoah Sanders' Black Unity, and Eddie Gale's Black Rhythms Happening, like where it's so many layers that you kind of have to just immerse yourself in the experience, you know.
That's so dope, man. Thank you for expanding on that. You know what? I was trying to get more information on you, and you know, it wasn't that much available, man. So, but I was able to find the Stereo Gum interview, and and in it was a great dialogue that you had. But one of your quotes was, "We are not careerists with music, but we're culturalists documenting Detroit. And you know, I found that really fascinating. And if you don't mind, just sort of expanding on that a little bit more for us, of sort of what you do within the culture of Detroit and how that impacts the music industry and just how that intersected with your career.
Absolutely. So I got into the hip hop scene very early, national and local. And locally, I started to be on the scene probably when I was about 15, 16. And at that time, you got to understand, this is like the second wave of Detroit hip hop. So the first wave, it were a few artists that were like trying to break through to a national level. But we're talking about a time in which it's like either you have to be from the West Coast, the East Coast, or rap a lot. And that was it, you know. And so we had some guys in that first wave that made great efforts, but I think the rest of the country wasn't ready to hear them. And then we kind of had like the scene that emerged from that, to where like there was this like worldwide backpack underground movement kind of happening, where like you saw a similar sentiment that was kind of like emerging from the sentiment of the native tongues, to where, a bunch of guys in the scene start like finding, the 5% Nation, and, like cats start growing locks and wearing backpacks and chew sticks and like, you know what I mean? Like we were listening to Souls of Mischief and like, and all that stuff, and so like none of us thought that anybody would make it, right? Like it was far gone. Like the first person that it was like, wait a minute, what's happening probably was Dilla, right? Because Dilla was a guy that we had known for years. I didn't know him personally, but he was really close to my man YG. And like he was producing for everybody. He was the first person, like when word got out that he had started working with Tip and Shaheed, it was like, what? Like that can't happen. That doesn't happen to us. Right? And it was like, whoa, what's going on? So it wasn't until the late 90s that guys started feeling like they can do this for a living. When they saw M finally get on in 99 and other guys start to make strides. So for us, a lot of times there was a deep sense of community. Like we all shared each other's equipment. We all taught each other how to record and do everything. So there's a very intense brotherhood amongst all these guys that are kind of from the scene here. And for me, it was like that always trumped everything, because I had a cousin that was actually in the hip hop business growing up. And a few times I would go out to New York and build with him, right? And he was one of the first promoters of hip hop music in the South. So he was responsible for getting the Stetsasonic records everywhere, the Mantronics records, and Schoolie D and Ice-T and all these people, right? He parlayed that into a situation at Def Jam where he was marketing director, and then he was at Elektra when Dante Ross was there and all of this stuff. And so I would go around, I was a teenager, I would go around to these label offices with him, and I would see how people would talk about artists, and it was like, it just turned me off. Like, you realize that these guys are products now, right? And for me, like just living in the nature of the city and the intensity sometimes of living in the city, I need to have the ability to express freely for my sanity. And Boldy comes from that same cloth. So we have to let go of any pursuits of our position or standing in the world to be able to explore the things that we need to within ourselves. And so we're willing to do that at the expense of pandering to an audience, right? So to be real with you, I was surprised as hell that the album kind of like took off the way it did, because I swear, I went to sleep the night before expecting to wake up to crickets, right? And then I wake up and it's like stereo gum calls it a masterpiece, and I'm getting like every 5 minutes, it's like, I'm getting shit. And it's like, wait a minute, we didn't even talk to anybody. Like, how did this happen? Right? Because to be real with you, I was just grateful he let me put the record out.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because, you know, my thing was I knew that this was going to be a little bit of a challenge for perhaps the people that have a particular orientation into what they're familiar with, with him, you know.
Yep.
And I knew I was like fucking up the party a little bit.
Yeah,
so,
in a good way though. In a good way.
Yeah, so you know, like I didn't know how that was going to be, and I really, to be real with you, I didn't care either. I just was happy at the light of day, you know, because one thing about it, and going back to the thing about being a culturalist before a careerist, is for me, I feel like somebody has to make a pure statement. You know, like somebody got to take the L for the team. You know what I mean? Like somebody has to speak with clear and utter clarity of, you know, like the purest of intentions, and that was the thing for me to like, because I know how excited I get when I hear something that feels like it's completely unaffected by what's happening in the landscape. Where it feels like you're an experience. Like I would always think about Miles Davis, where he would say, like, he says something to the effect of like, I don't care what you want to hear, you're coming with me. You know what I mean? So I see myself as more a friendly abductor than a taxi driver when it comes to making music.
That's so dope.
Friendly abductor from Detroit. We had Apollo Brown on the program not too long ago.
That's my bro.
Yeah, he has a dope basement as well. So we asked him this question, and I'd love to get your take on it. Is there a Detroit sound? I know if somebody says Detroit, I get certain images and I think about certain sounds. But you as an artist who's from there, who's been through these waves you talked about, is there a sound? And if so, like, what is that? Yeah,
okay. It's funny, too, because I actually listened to that show and I heard that question. So.
Wow. Thanks, man.
That's dope.
To answer the question, I think it's multiple Detroit sounds. Okay. But I would say I think that there is also a ubiquitous thread that weaves throughout all of Detroit sonic expressions. And I'll give you an example. I don't know how much you guys are familiar with this new wave of street rap that's coming from Detroit, like Sada Baby, and then there's the Payrolls and the Peasies, and it's more like the street rap side of Detroit music. And a lot of people talk about how these guys kind of rap ahead of the beat a little bit, or it's like it seems a little bit.
Oh, T Grizzly type of.
T Grizzly, all those guys, Gang, Shred Gang, like, and if you notice, like, yeah, there's like, it sounds like they're ahead of the beat sometimes, or there's a pocket that's a little bit kind of southpaw, right? And I know people here that sometimes are like on the more so like boom bap side of things, or underground side of things, like, man, they just off beat. And I'm like, no, like, understand that, like, in a lot of ways, to me, it mirrors Dilla's refutation of the quantization. Like, Detroiters are so much about locking into a rhythm that is not confined to the metronome. And it has a relationship to it, but it's not confined to it, right? Because, like, there's a flow, you know, when I bounce up back, when I that, right? And people like, they're ahead of the beat. And when I started working with young guys that were doing that flow, and when I first heard it, I was like, I'm like, say that again, thinking they're gonna say it different because they didn't have a concept of the rhythm, right? Said it the exact same way. Did it again, said it the exact. I'm like, oh shit, this is a pocket. This is a pocket, And so I think that the thread in Detroit sound is this complete desire to find a sense of freedom within time, right? And that's whether that's Detroit Techno and the Belleville 3, that's Dilla, the T Grizzly stuff. It's in everything. So I think like one thing about Detroiters, if you notice, like Detroiters like to move. So a lot of times it has a little hitch to it. It has a little, like it jerks you a little bit, And so I think a lot of the sound that comes from here has immense consciousness in terms of its relationship to how a body moves when it's consumed. That affects the way the music sounds.
Wow. That was such a great answer. Thank you. We all want to sign up for your class, Professor Toles. I don't even know where to go next. I guess I would go here. You seem like you are not just a hip hop guy, but you're really like a music guy.
Right.
Can we talk about a little bit of like the music you grew up on? Like how did you arrive at this kind of thought process, and like what's your biggest influences?
Oh man, yeah. So, like I was telling somebody the other day, music is such a vital part of this city, man. It's the backbone of the city, and I realized just recently, like somebody brought up like the jazziness of the record, and it hit me for the first time. Like, look, like I knew who Grover Washington was and who Michael Franks was before I knew who Michael Jackson was. Like, we had a radio station called WJZZ that would play. It was a 24-hour jazz station in Detroit, and like so much of that sound was in the city and around the city my entire childhood, listening to Parliament Funkadelic, as a kid, before years later I would realize that these records were made here. And, I wonder why, like, it's so much in my blood and in my heart, And, so from a very early age, like I had my own records because my father noticed that I was like really into music. And then when my cousin, like I was telling you, when he got in the industry, and I'm so grateful for this. So he was at Def Jam by '89. Like he was on the team when they brought third base in. And I remember he playing the tape and he was like, "What you think?" I'm like, "This is dope." He's like, "You notice anything?" I'm like, "I don't notice nothing." He's like, "Listen again." I'm like, "I don't notice nothing." He's like, "Listen again." Yeah, I know. It's like, "They're white." I'm like, "What?" And you gotta remind, 89, like that was like unheard of. Like that was like, what? You know what I'm saying? So like he would send me literally boxes of tapes from all his label friends of like promotional stuff that never came out, stuff that just came out. And it allowed me to really get intimate with hip hop in a way in which a lot of other kids didn't. You know what I mean? So it's like they on Ice Cube, and I'm like, "Hey, you ever heard of Lakim Shabazz?" And like, who the fuck is that? Like, I had all this shit, and I was listening to all of this shit, So yes, so like that was very pivotal to me. And I had a cousin on the east side that was like one of the first rappers in the city, had to be, because there wasn't a lot of people doing it then. And like I remember seeing him rap at a birthday party like about 1984, and I was like, okay, like I'll do this now. You know what I mean? Like this is what I'm supposed to be doing. So for a long time I was just into it and was freestyling and all of that stuff. And then yeah, man, it was something that it was it was always there for me, and I always had a lot of people around that would feed me stuff. And, you know, like my father was really into jazz. And so like I would listen to a lot of those records that he had when I was young. And Mojo was a big influence. You know, the Electrifying Mojo is a DJ in Detroit that kind of really like centralized the music culture from the late 70s to the mid 80s. And what Mojo did, what a lot of people don't know, Mojo was the guy that actually broke Prince. You know, Prince didn't take off immediately, and the first city that really jumped on Prince was Detroit, and that was through the Electrifying Mojo. And the thing about Mojo is that he kind of set the template for what you probably call the Detroit sound for everybody that came after his show. So in that sense, like he would play Parliament Funkadelic, he would play Duran Duran. He would play like he would create an experience that was completely devoid of genre, which is the exact same thing I'm doing with this record, right? But like he kind of really expanded the sensibilities of Detroiters in a way in which we didn't necessarily care about genre. We cared about the groove and the energy in it, right? And so from that, you get Dilla, you get Detroit techno. All of that comes from the stage that the Electrifying Mojo set up, you know. And so we had a lot of cultural institutions within the city that really kind of like advanced and curated our sensibilities in a lot of ways, you know. So we had a dance show called The New Dance Show, and before that it was a show called The Scene, and like those are like our Soul Train. It's like we had our own media in a lot of ways that completely catered to Detroit sensibilities. So I kind of come from that, man, where it's like I wanted to, and through my music, kind of show you know, just like the kind of underbelly of the culture that a lot of people outside of the city don't get to see, you know.
Absolutely.
So we have Manger on McNichols. It's out. Mm-hmm. You didn't have high hopes, but it's getting critical acclaim already. Does it make you? You've kind of mentioned not being a careerist. Do you have something else in the pipe now that this is kind of taking off? Do you have designs on doing other similar work? Like kind of what's on the horizon for you?
So what's immediately on the horizon is I'm working with a jazz duo called Balance, and it's a pianist and a woodwinds player. And they're kind of from the same community of guys that played on my record. And so I'm producing some stuff on that record. And then from that point, like, to be real, I'm not sure. Like, you know, like every project I've done, I've never known I was doing a project until it's like, oh, I'm doing a project. You know. That's dope. And two, like, because one thing I think about a lot of times is moving with intentionality. I'm not a volume guy. I'm not a guy that's like making 50 beats a week or no shit like that. Like, I really like to develop things. And, you know, because I see time as a container, you know, and if every action that I make in pursuit of creating a project is rooted in love, then say when that container is turned over, that's 12 years of love poured on the people, or 13, or however many years it took. So one thing that I've always been intentional about with my process is to not be concerned with the outcome and completely immerse myself in the process. Because a lot of times I feel like people undercut the process to get to the outcome, in which they want the love that comes from the outcome, whether that be from, you know, the material things that it produces, or people saying it's dope or whatever else. For me, it's like the promised land is the process. Like, I really don't care what comes in the outcome, because 100% of me goes into the process. And so a lot of times I feel like I don't necessarily choose projects. Projects choose me. And so I just have to be pliable enough and elastic enough to be able to accommodate what it needs of me for it to happen. So to answer your question, I don't have no goddamn clue necessarily what is that, you know. And so, and it was funny too, because me and Boldy the other day were talking about like, what we, you know, he's like, so what are we gonna do for the next one? And I'm like, oh, okay, you know. So, so yeah, it's pretty open, man. But I think for me too, like to not get stuck in one place, you know, because one thing I always tell young guys is too, like you got to understand, I was somebody that watched this culture from the beginning. You know what I mean? Like I remember, I'm 43, so I remember, you know, Sugar Hill Gang, and I remember Grandma's Flash and Furious 5, and I felt like my parents' music. And then I remember hearing Run DMC and being like, oh shit, like this is our music. And then thinking that's what it is. And then hearing Rakim for the first time being like, what the fuck? Like he just completely tore apart the Run DMC template of hip hop making. And then, you know, here comes Public Enemy, and they tear up that template. And then and I tell young guys, the only tradition in hip hop is to defy tradition. That is the only tradition. So it's funny because people are like calling me a jazz composer and all this stuff. I ain't mad at it, but to me, it's like what hip hop is saying. I don't give a fuck what it was.
Right?
Yeah.
Watch what it becomes. Watch what I make it become. You know. So to me, that's hip hop is a motherfucker. You know what I'm saying? This album to me is hip hop to the motherfucker. You know what I mean? But I think one thing that we get wrapped up in is this idea of hip hop as a sound. And I think that happens too when we create a lexicon too, where sometimes there are critics in place and people in place that now define what it is sonically. But people have to understand the life of a culture is dependent on the vitality of the energy continuing to evolve, you know? So a lot of times, you know, that was the thing that kind of got me into all this other shit in the late 90s, because I felt like a lot of hip hop in the late 90s kind of like carried the template of the hip hop of the early 90s, to where it's like, wait a minute, we still have to keep moving forward. You know what I mean? Like before Come Clean, nothing sounded like Come Clean. You know what I'm saying? And years after that, it was like making some shit that sound like Come Clean was hip hop. It's like, no, like you gotta stay, come clean. It was unprecedented when it arrived. Right. And that's the spirit of it, you know? And so like, that's what eventually got me into Portishead and Massive Attack and Aphex Twin and Square Pusher and all this stuff, because I felt like they were continuing to push the possibilities and what we're able to do with these machines that now are in existence as a result of hip hop. And so for me, it's about the continuation of continuing to be open to knowing that the energy of the culture was meant to take on new forms and not be stagnant within a particular sound, you know. And I think it's beautiful to uphold certain moments, but we have to also be open to new ones, you know.
Right.
Right. Yes. And Manger on McNichols, I just want to say, it feels like a new moment. I don't think we've heard this sonic landscape, this type of lyrical content, especially from somebody like Boldy, who is at the top of his game right now and doing so much. So really excited about that project. Everybody go hit up Bandcamp, interact with that project. And Sterling doesn't know what's next, but I'm excited for it. Whatever that ends up being, whenever it comes out, man, we're excited, and we want to just thank you for being on the program, man. Thank you.
Oh man, my pleasure, man. It's great to deal with you guys, bro.
Yeah, I have to say, like, this has been such a great interview, and you're an inspiring person. Like, I will be checking out everything you do from here on out, because the way you expressed yourself and the way that you were able to kind of just tell us what's really going on, I think was just really, really cool. And just thank you very much.
Yeah, no, if I can say real quick, like, I appreciate you saying that, because for me, like, this is the most important part of it all for me, the community of it. And people, like, where did this guy come from? And it's like, I've been too busy in community to pursue a career. You know what I mean? Like, Boldy was a kid in my studio at 17 years old. Dej Loaf was a kid in my studio at 15 years. Like, I've been in community with people through music, because the beautiful thing about music is it gives people the opportunity to connect and explore each other in ways in which, without music, we're going to be a little bit more standoffish towards each other or disconnected, you know. And so I've always used music as a platform to create authentic intimacy with people in a way in which now our relationships begin to replicate the point of production, which is you take all these separate elements, but the key is to make one thing with a series of elements, right? And through the instruments listening to each other and corresponding with each other and being in consideration of each other and having compassion for each other and giving each other space. Like, music is the blueprint for the possibility of humanity, right? And so for me, I never lose that focus. Like, music is here to remind me that I am able to engage with people, and through, like, receiving them lovingly and compassionately allows us to emote something collectively now that's beautiful than just us playing solos the rest of our goddamn lives. You know what I mean?
That's so perfect, man.
So yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, man. Super appreciate it. Super appreciate your time, man. It's so dope.
Man, appreciate y'all, man. Much love, man. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was a pleasure.
Yeah.
All right, take care of yourself.
Peace, man.
We'll catch up with you some other time.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thanks, man. Peace.
Peace.